Apart from the summer of 1904, sailing has played its part in every Olympic Games. And as the patriotic song goes, Britannia really does rule the waves. Great Britain leads the overall medals table with 28 golds, 9 ahead of its nearest challenger, the USA, winning a further 2 in Rio 4 years ago. But what's the future for this historic Olympic event, with Paris 2024 looking for more windsurfing and kiteboarding categories? And can the team, already picked for Tokyo 2020 this summer, maintain its high standards? I'm Michael.
And I'm John, and on this edition of Anything But Footy's Great British Bosses, where we focus on the leading figures behind the scenes of our Olympic and Paralympic sports, we're in Southampton to meet the man who'll be leading the charge.
And my name's Ian Walker. I'm the Performance Director for the British Sailing Team.
Ian, firstly, thank you for having us to Southampton. We're in Olympic year. There's that little tingle, isn't there, inside you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's every 4 years it comes around. And for a sport like sailing, you've got to understand it's our one chance for us to be sort of at the same level as the 100 metres or, the sort of famous sports that you'll see every year on the television. This is the chance to be on the same footing. So for us, it matters so much. And the athletes have put in probably, definitely 4 years, but more likely 12 years in order to get to this point. So it's a huge moment, and our job's to try and give them the best chance of winning it we can.
I'm looking forward to talking to you about the team, because some of it's already been named, and the future of sailing in the Olympics. But I want to talk a little bit about you to start with. How do you become the performance director, having obviously been highly successful as a sailor, and then why sailing originally? So tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, I learnt to sail when I was 8. My parents didn't sail. I grew up in Sevenoaks in Kent near a little gravel pit. And there was a sailing club there called Chipstead Sailing Club. But I think my passion, apparently, according to my parents, started before that when we lived in Paris and we used to rent a model boat on a pond in the middle of Paris. So you never know where the spark for sport and passion is going to come from. I really wanted to be a West Ham player, but I wasn't fast enough, although in recent times maybe I'd have got in their team. But, I was a left footer, played on the left wing, was never going to make it as a professional footballer, fell in love with sailing, happened to go sailing when I got back to England, sailed at Chipstead Sailing Club. Somewhere along the line, I probably won a little prize that I took to school, and I decided that was the sport for me. And, one of the reasons I loved sailing was I thought to myself that there's no reason I couldn't be the best at this. It was not just a physical game, but it was a mental game. And I could see that the more I did it, the better I was getting at it. And I guess I won something early on. I had that passion. And I just, from then on, I wanted to sail in the Olympics. I wanted to sail around the world.
So from that, how do you then become a 2-time Olympian and 2-time Olympic medalist?
Well, there's always a little bit of luck involved, as there's sort of forks in the road, and I think initially it was commitment. Certainly, all through my teenaging years, I was obsessed with sailing. My bedroom walls were covered in pictures that I'd cut out of magazines of boats. There were, Peter Blake at times. So Peter Blake, who was a famous America's Cup sailor from New Zealand, and Laurie Smith was the big name in British yachting at the time. So, and I remember when I was 19, I went out to watch the start of the Round the World race. But there's small things, how make big impressions on you. I was sailing at a club called Weirwood Sailing Club. It was the middle of winter. It was freezing cold, 1981. I remember it vividly. And I was sailing this little mirror dinghy, and we were coming in because it was so windy and I was cold. I was in floods of tears, so I was frozen cold. And this boat went past in a ball of spray, and I was like, who's that? And somebody said, oh, that's a 470, and they're training for the Olympics. And I was like, wow, I want to be able to do that one day. And that's a reminder of how important it is for our Olympic sailors and other sportsmen to be out in the community, meeting people and giving that inspiration, because I was inspired by somebody in a 470, and I just worked away at it, one step at a time. And in the end, I sailed with this fantastically talented sailor called Johnny Merricks, who he and I were first and second in the youth nationals. We teamed up together, and then we became an almost unbeatable pairing in the Olympics back in the early 90s.
Yeah, so a silver two silvers, the 470 in 96, and then the star in 2000. And was that the heyday of British sailing in some ways?
I'm not sure I'd use the word heyday. I mean, everything has to be put in the context of the National Lottery and UK sports support of elite sport in this country, and that the advent of that was 97. John Major made the decision after the terrible performance of the British team in 96.
Did you guys, as a member of that team, did you feel that it was a poorer performance?
Well, we did all right. We got a silver medal and Ben Ainsley got a silver medal. So I think there was 1 gold medal, Steve Redgrave and Matt Pinson, and I think 8 silver and 6 bronze. And of course, 2 of the silvers were sailing. And we were removed from the Olympic Village. So we were just in our own little bubble, actually doing pretty well as a nation. But of course, there was the general malaise, and in the British press, they tore the team apart. We were insulated from that. But of course, winning those 2 silver medals for sailing was just the right time, because then the funding system came in, and that rewarded sports who could deliver medal-winning success, and we were right at the front of the queue for that because of those performances, and then we really went on a roll. And I mean, Sydney for me probably was the pinnacle. I wasn't involved for a few years after that, but 3 golds and 2 silvers on the steps of the Opera House in Australia, one of our main rivals' backyard, was an absolute highlight. I mean, I think the team won 6 medals in Beijing after then, but to get the 3 golds, especially in Sydney Harbour, was extraordinary.
And then you became a coach, and you led the famous 3 blondes in a boat in Athens.
Yeah, I mean, how long have you got? I went off. It was starting to have to do some professional sailing to pay for my sailing, and I did the America's Cup, skipper the British America's Cup team. When I finished with that, I didn't come back to the Star because, well, to be quite honest, Ian Percy and Bart were world champions. So why would I take them on? I knew my limits. So we had a British boat who was world champion. I only had a year to prepare, and so I decided to try and do the next best thing, which was to help somebody else. And so, yeah, I mean, the 3 blondes in the boats, as they were coined by the Daily Mail, but, they were 3 extraordinary female athletes in Shirley and the 2 Sarahs, and so dominant that they won with 2 races to spare in Athens, and that was a totally different experience for me being a coach, much more like being a parent. When you can't actually affect the result once you've sort of said your goodbyes, and it's all worry and angst. But I needn't have worried about a thing. They delivered with aplomb.
And then becoming now, as you say, director of racing from 2017. I mean, when you were an 8-year-old child, did you ever think my whole career is going to be yachting?
My whole career is going to be sports administration. No, I mean, I guess you've missed 12 years in the middle there, where I sailed around the world 3 times. I skippered 3 boats around the world. And again, I never meant to do that. I wanted to sail around the world, but I never thought I'd have it in me to sail at that high level and in Grand Prix boats around the world. I kind of fell into it by accident as a business deal, ironically. But that was a tremendous life-changing experience for me. But it also really gave me the experience of leading a larger group of people and working with commercial sponsors and being part of something much bigger than just myself in my boat or coaching one team in the Olympics. So I guess all of that, I should say I went to university as well, so I had an education behind me, although I did spend most of my time sailing at university. But I guess all of that together, all of those life experiences and sporting experiences, made me a candidate for this role. And there's all sorts of skills I didn't have, and I'm still learning day to day. But fortunately, here I am. I'm still involved in the sport I love, as you can tell. I hope you can tell I'm really passionate about it. And as you say, this is a huge year for us.
I think you were quoted in 2017 as saying you'd missed the thrill of the competition. Have you gained it elsewhere?
Yeah, the strange thing is I've not missed the pressure of being a full-time sportsman and the need to deliver for yourself, for your parents, for your sponsors, for your teammates. That is grinding, and I did it for 25 years, sailing professionally. It's a tremendous privilege. Don't get me wrong, to do what you love as your living, but then it's not your hobby anymore. So I'm in a great situation now where I sail for fun. I do. I sail on a Wednesday night in the summer. I'll be sailing on Sunday morning out of the local sailing club, and I have a lot of fun also sailing with my daughter. So I sail for fun, but at the same time, I'm completely at the cutting edge, having the opportunity to work with the best young sailors in the world who are, to be quite frank, operating at a far higher level of performance than we were 20 years ago.
One of the things we've learned doing the Great British Bosses series is that every governing body is slightly different. So, say British Swimming just look after the elite swimmers. They're nothing to do with the pools and getting people swimming. But my understanding with your role is you are in charge of those elite sailors, but you're also trying to get the next through, the grassroots coming through as well?
Yeah, I try not to use the word in charge. I guess responsible is maybe a better word. And yeah, I wear two hats. I am both the performance director and ultimately responsible for the performance of the Olympic team and the pathway, really answering not just to my board but to UK Sports board, who provide the majority of the funding. But I'm also director of racing for pretty much every other type of sailboat racing in the UK and everything that sits behind it. So that could be the race officials, the measurers, the rules, international relations, team racing, student racing, a whole plethora of things that underpin our sport. And I'm just as passionate about that. If sailing is not healthy in our clubs, and we've got 1,300 clubs all around the country, if it's not healthy there, we won't have people coming in at the bottom to fill our teams and breed success of the future. So, it's many sports having a really tough time at the moment, and sailing is broadly stable at the moment, but it's declined a lot from the heyday in the sort of 70s and 80s when I was a kid. And we need healthy clubs, and we need to get people out on the water enjoying everything that I fell in love with.
Well, let's talk about the clubs for a minute, because you said you go on a Sunday. Have you guys noticed that, as the world does change and people's lives change and social changes, that actually people want more of their weekends? They don't necessarily want to be on the water every weekend?
There's a multitude of social changes that are just a fact. Whether it's the rise of social media, whether it's if you go back far enough, Sunday shopping had a big impact. The role of the father in the family, and the difference in the makeups of families and family life and what that looks like. It was acceptable once for your dad to go off to Cowes and go yachting for the weekend. Well, it doesn't work like that anymore, and nor should it. So, as a sport, and by the way, people are working harder, they're time poor, they maybe have less disposable income. Well, a portion of society has less disposable income, and a portion of society has a huge amount of disposable income. So the makeup of society's changed, and the sport needs to try and respond to that. And fundamentally, we are a sport that takes quite a long time to do, and can be quite expensive. There are ways of it being more affordable, but the perception is very often, and the reality can be, that it's very expensive. And that is a challenge, especially when you've got the competition of many more sports that people weren't doing 20, 30 years ago. Who had heard of kiteboarding? Who'd heard of foiling, windsurfing? And that's just two within our domain. But there's plenty more. Stand-up paddleboarding, rock climbing, surfing, the rise of pop concerts, music. I can't call them. My daughter said I can't call them pop concerts. Music festivals. All of that is a huge draw that maybe wasn't there to the same degree. And we've got to compete with that, along with lots of other traditional sports, many of whom are struggling. And
are you concerned about the future of the clubs, or are you, as you said earlier, feeling that you're pretty healthy?
I'm concerned. I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't concerned. That doesn't mean I'm negative about it. I think that it means we have to respond, and we are just the governing body. But what we try to do is make sure that the lessons learned in the clubs that are doing well are shared with the other clubs, and trying to urge the clubs, the importance of responding to the changing dynamic of the market. So, yeah, it's like any business, any sport, you have to react to the environment around you, and it feels like the world is changing at an increasingly rapid pace, and therefore we can't sit still.
It seems a bit of a silly question, but it's always one that troubles me. Is it British Sailing, or is it the Royal Yachting Association?
Well, as a governing body, we are the Royal Yachting Association, and there's many reasons why it has stayed like that. It is such a strong brand, internationally recognised as the standard of, for instance, training of skippers or crew. The quality of that brand. It would be quite dangerous as an organisation to move away from that. But of course, yachting is not what we consider most of us to do. The Olympic sailing team, it's dinghy sailing, it's kiteboarding, it's windsurfing. It's none of those people would say they're yachtsmen. They might say they're sailors, they might say they're foilers, boarders, come what may. So really it's about sailing, it's about being on the water, it's boating, if you like, in its widest sense. So yeah, we, as the performance side, we call ourselves the British sailing team, which I think is akin with British swimming and British rowing and British canoeing. And
it's interesting you say the brand in the world works, but probably in Britain, British sailing kind of does what it says on the tin.
Yeah, that's probably the case. But if you were in Australia and you wanted to become a yacht skipper, you'd be aspiring to become an REA Ocean Yacht Master, because that's how strong the brand is, and that's a historical thing, and it's a mark of quality.
You're listening to Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy, the podcast series where we meet the men and women in charge of sport in Great Britain. We're in Southampton talking to Ian Walker of British Sailing.
I want to talk about the Olympics because, we touched on it about, your success and that success that we had in Sydney and Beijing. Rio, I mean, you started to take charge from 2017. Looking back on Rio, 2 golds, but 3 medals. Did British sailing underperform slightly?
Well, I was working for the BBC at the time, commentating, and as always with sailing, you are at the mercy of the wind, of what the competition decides to do. There's always surprises, there's always upsets. With 2 golds, we were top of the medal table, but I guess as a team, we wouldn't be happy with 3 medals. We won 5 medals in Sydney. I think we won 6 in Beijing, 5 in Weymouth, I think, although just Ben, I think, was the sole gold, if I'm right. They'll shoot me if I'm wrong. Sir Ben, I should say, Ben Ainsley. So for sure, we're aiming higher than 3 medals. Having said that, what price do you put on gold? And winning those 2 gold medals is what made it special in Rio.
And how then important is it that the 2 people who won the gold, admittedly Hannah has a different partner, but they're coming back?
Well, it's crucial for us as a team because they know what it takes. They are looked up to by everybody else in the team. They set the standards. But just because they won gold in Rio doesn't mean they're going to win gold in Tokyo. It does get hard as you get older. There's new challenges that you have to confront. Whether it can be boredom with the training, it can be the desire to have other things in your life. So if you take Giles Scott as an example, he's a full-time sailor for the America's Cup team. So he's squeezing his Olympic sailing in and around effectively a full-time job. So he's got real challenges in terms of the time he can commit, and therefore he's having to be a lot smarter as to how he goes about it. It's that as you get older, you sort of get smarter and wiser, and you can maybe be a bit more efficient, but maybe the body gives up on you a little bit, and you've got other draws on your time, be it family or work. Hannah's got the challenge of a new sailing partner, Aileen McIntyre, but they're world champions right now. They're in a great space. I mean, I think they've medalled in pretty much every event they've done together. So yeah, we expect great things from them, but like everybody else, they've still got to deliver it on the day.
And just on Giles, before we move on to the other team members, he obviously finished 4th in the World Championships and admitted he's got a lot of work to do. It was a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, and I spoke to his coach day before yesterday to catch up. The event was down under, so I wasn't there. I should say that I have an Olympic manager who oversees all of the Olympic team, so it's not like I'm in the boat park. I'm out there watching all these guys day in, day out. There's too many. We've got 70 sailors in our program, as well as the other side of my job that we've talked about. Part of me is thinking maybe a 4th's a good result in the sense that it'll give him a little bit of a wake up, as you say. He knows himself. He's been balancing his time and his priorities. Clearly, he's going to have to rebalance slightly. The question is, has his standards dropped or have everybody else got better, or is it a bit of both? And I suspect it's a bit of both. There's no doubt over time that all the competition, they catch up. We had a huge advantage, I believe, in the early 2000s with the advent of the UK Sport and National Lottery funding. And I think we then set new standards that other people, they're always catching up. And it's really hard to find those marginal gains to keep moving ahead. It's a bit more complicated than that, as always. Giles was testing a bit of equipment and trying to validate where he's at. So I'm not in any way concerned about his performance in Tokyo. And if he can come forth training, maybe half as much as he'd ideally like, then he's in a good shape.
I was going to say, if he's a full-time athlete with the America's Cup, it shows the importance of the Olympics to the sailing community, as we talked about right at the start.
That's right. The Olympics is really and short. I'd say short of bringing the America's Cup to Britain, which I think would be extraordinary for the sport and would be really front page of the newspapers type story. Short of that, the Olympics is the only chance you get in sailing to be on a par with the other sports, and that's it is the purest test of the sport and the athlete. So that's why people keep coming back to it over and over.
The rest of the team, and we say it's you're one of the first people to name the team for Tokyo, so we know that these people are going. Is a mixture of experience with people who won medals in London, maybe not at Rio, and then some real youngsters as well.
Yeah, we've got some really exciting youngsters. I mean, that young Emma Wilson, who's qualified in the RSX, and she's been knocking on the door of medals all the whole of last year. I think she was sailing in the youth championship 2 years ago, or certainly 2 years from 2019 ago. So she, really rapid progress. We've seen that be successful in that class before with
and that's windsurfing.
That's windsurfing. So young female windsurfer.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Be careful, we're not slipping into jargon. So yeah, she's on one end of the spectrum. And I think that's what you want. I mean, I think even if you're trying to win the Premier League, don't you want a mixture of experience and youth? If you've got all the oldies, then who's going to do the running around? And if you've just got a lot of youngsters, who's going to know when to calm it down and make the right decision? So for me, overseeing the team, that's exactly what I'd like to see. I'd like to see people coming through, people who can then, they've got their 2 or 3 Olympics ahead of them, but enough older, wiser heads to just sort of set the tone.
Are you allowed to tell me what your target is?
For the games, I don't know whether I guess I can tell you what I like. But I mean, I think my view, looking at the team we've got, I think we will go into the games with 5 teams who I would be really disappointed if they didn't medal. I would go so far as to say that I'm expecting them certainly really capable of delivering a medal-winning performance. And I think the other 5 teams are also very capable of doing so. So, I think 5 medals would be a really good performance. I think we're capable of more, but we could easily win less. It's on the day. Much will depend on the conditions. I think our team is stronger in windier conditions than light winds. So give us 10 days of very light winds, and I'll be happy with whatever we can get. But in a broad range of conditions.
What's the weather likely to be like?
Well, that's a
I know, that's
game.
a silly
There's one thing they say in sailing, which is whenever you turn up to regatta, they say it's not normally like this. I mean, obviously, we spend a huge amount of effort and energy trying to research the weather. The team have been training out there for the last 3 summers, and the thing that makes it quite difficult is the summer period there is very short. As you saw in the news last year, they had 3 typhoons in the summer last year that narrowly missed Tokyo. You saw that with the Japanese, the World Cup rugby was the last one of those typhoons that went through. So if you get a typhoon, it can have very windy conditions just before, and it can then lead to very light conditions in the wake behind. So you can get anything. If you had asked me what the average condition is beautiful sailing conditions, medium winds onshore. It's an ocean course, so there'd be big waves, and I think we'd be in for a real show and great photography, and it has the potential to be exceptional.
Has it helped you as a governing body, and also the sailors, that the Olympics is in Japan this year in Tokyo, which the conditions are certainly cleaner than what they were in Rio, because the whole build-up to Rio was the concern about the water quality and the amount of pollution that there was. And has that helped that it's in Tokyo, taking some of the kind of other distractions away?
As always, those distractions are probably exaggerated in the media, but there's no doubt in Rio the team had to take a lot of precautions, whether it was disinfecting clothing daily, disinfecting the the motorboats that the coaches drive. We did have coaches that went down ill during the games, and there was various illnesses. So it was a reality. But it also gave us a chance to get an edge, because if we could do all that better than other nations, then that gave us an edge. Tokyo doesn't have any of those problems. It has different challenges. Obviously, the one that the media are latching onto more than most is the heat and humidity, which, by the way, is also a reality. But it's hopefully less of an issue for sailing than it is for marathon running or triathlon, as an example. So every venue you go to has different challenges, and Rio was, for sailing was pretty dramatic. Being in the harbour, Sugarloaf Mountain behind, we had some extraordinary conditions outside the harbour. It was a shame they weren't televised, because we had wind and waves and some of the best conditions you could hope for. So I just hope we get good wind and we can really showcase the sport for what it is.
I remember sitting in the sailing venue for a day when there was no wind, waiting for Giles to win his gold medal, and we all came back the next day.
I know the number of times the BBC cut to us and we had to say, sorry, racing's delayed. So I really hope that won't happen in Japan, and I'm confident that in the afternoons generally you've got a good sailing breeze there. And
how proud are you of Hannah Mills for standing up for her big plastic pledge? And I'm sure British Sailing's right behind it as well. But how much of a problem is plastic in the seas and plastic pollution for your sport?
Well, it depends where you are. I've sailed around the world, as I said, 3 times. So I've seen plastic in the Southern Ocean. I've seen plastic in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I've seen how hard it is to sail up, particularly, say, the South China Sea. But equally, I've had a plastic bag on my rudder sailing in my home sailing club in England. So nowhere is immune from this. I think that sailing has always, because it was so closely interlinked with the environment, the wind and the waves, I think we have an affinity for these things. I think that the worldwide governing body, World Sailing, were very quick to come up with a sustainability agenda, and they've encouraged governing bodies to be on board with that. The Royal Yachting Association was very early on as well, adopting sustainable practices, and many of those were put into the venues as well for 2012. So I actually think that we've sort of been ahead of the game, but as always, you can do more, and I'm proud of what we've done, and I'm really proud of what the stance that Hannah has made, and with Ailey's support, because I think that's what really makes the wider population kind of connect with these issues. Of course, plastics the big one, because thanks to David Attenborough, and I've seen many races lost. In fact, Bryony Shaw fell off her windsurf in Rio because she hit a plastic bag on the fin of her windsurf, and that was on the first day and really derailed her challenge. So it is a real thing for us, but of course it's much wider than just plastic. But we'll start with the plastic, and hopefully we'll have a clear race course. And from what I've seen in Tokyo, then the main thing is to avoid the fishing nets, and as long as you're not where the fishing nets are, you're just fine.
Well, we'll wish you all the best of luck for Tokyo. Just on the future of sailing in the Olympics, is there any fear that it might not be there in the future?
I don't think so. I mean, it was a founding sport of the Olympics. The only reason it didn't take place in the first Olympics was because of the weather. So it's always been there. I think that World Sailing has really good relations with the IOC, but And I would say that it's been a sport that has responded to the demands of the IOC. So in terms of gender equity, we will have an equal number of male and female athletes in Tokyo, and in Paris we'll have an equal number of, half of the events will be male and half the events will be female. And it's responding to some of the changes in terms of media appeal. So we'll see, we've got foiling catamarans now, we've got... In Paris, we'll have foiling windsurfs, we'll have foiling kiteboarding for the first time. So I think the fact that the governing body or the world governing body have been prepared to adopt new events that have more appeal to youth, that do respond to the needs of modern society, hopefully that will leave it well placed. So hopefully we're in good shape.
And can Great Britain maintain its place at the top of the medals table? We mentioned earlier that they lead the way throughout the whole of the Olympic history.
Yeah, well, we've got a bit of a lead in terms of gold medals. I think in number of medals we're just behind the US, aren't we? So we're hoping to. I'm not sure. I need to check that number, but hopefully we'll overtake them in Tokyo. Fingers crossed. But I think there's always a lot about the medal success of Team GB and can we sustain what was, to be honest, an extraordinary performance in Rio. Is that repeatable? I don't know. The challenge is that a lot of that success has been down to the funding and the structure that sits behind that. And the other countries don't just blindly ignore that. They're all responding in their own way. And what we're finding in sailing is that a lot of smaller nations who are just focusing on one or two classes and who are really quite exceptional. Countries such as Croatia, Hungary, as examples, who are perfectly capable of taking out gold medals. So it's we've got a much bigger challenge. They're all catching up, and of course the trying to find the little edges that keep us ahead. The marginal gains, as Dave Brailsford would say, are they're slowly disappearing. So that's our job, is to try and innovate and find ways of trying to stay ahead of the competition.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Ian. Your passion does shine through. I can say that. So thank you very much for talking to Anything But Footy's great British bosses.
Thank you very much.